recognizing some things in Jacob in myself. And I thought, wow, can't we just have a reflection on this and look at this passage together? Many of you do know this passage. We're talking about a family here. Isaac and Rebekah have 2 boys, Jacob and Esau, both of them twins. And from early on, Jacob is the one who's called the heel catcher. He's the one who's and then they were given this prophecy, Rebekah, that the younger would actually, the older would serve the younger. And I wouldn't call them a dysfunctional family. I would call them a normal family. Because as you look through it, there is favoritism at work in this passage. You know that Rebekah, she absolutely dotes on Jacob, and that's probably because he was the promised one, which inherited Abraham's promise. And then Esau, he was Isaac's favourite. Why was he Isaac's favourite? Because he loved his food that he used to make. I mean, if there's anything but dysfunctional in this passage, I see it. This favouritism at work. One is favoured, and perhaps the other one is slightly more unfavoured. And you can see Esau, he's the one who likes to get away into the open country quite a lot. So maybe he saw that at work in Jacob's life. So he was like, actually, I'm going to spend my whole life out in the fields and hunt and do things like that. And it seems to me that the only thing that Isaac, he was his favourite because he came back and he brought them wonderful meat to eat. And Jacob, you know, he steals, well, he asks, doesn't he, for Esau's, sell me your birthright. And Esau despised his birthright, the Bible says, and he actually gave it to him for a pot of stew. That's pretty cheap, isn't it? And then, just as Isaac was about to bless Esau before he died, because bear in mind he was the firstborn, Rebekah then says to Jacob, no, you go and dress up as Esau. And then that's when the deception happened, the lie to their father, and he received the blessing. Esau got really angry with him and wanted to kill him. So off Jacob went on this amazing journey. And really this story doesn't follow Esau. It follows who? It follows Jacob through this passage. And I'm not going to go too much into detail, but I looked at this passage with my dissertation. And I was looking at, and I'm very careful of these wording, the psychological observations of this family at work. Now, I know I'm not like Heather's. Heather's got a PhD in psychology. I haven't got any psychological qualifications at all. But I do enjoy looking at the studies to see how, how things that people endured growing up and how that affects their life into adulthood. So I decided to look at some studies, and there's one called, I don't know if you've heard of, what's her name? Ellen Webby-Libby. I don't know if you've heard of her. She wrote a book called The Favourite Child, and that's something I've looked at. And it's interesting when you look at this. Bear in mind, she's not even looked at the passage in Genesis. I mean, obviously, why would she? She's not a theologian. But she talks about the difference between an unfavoured child, and I don't know if that's the word I use, but that's the word I'll use today. Unfavoured child and the favoured child. And she said the unfavoured child, as they're growing up, because they've experienced their sibling receiving favour all the time and adoration from their parents, they grow up wanting validation from others because they've always been wanting that validation from their parents. And they become very vulnerable. So they become very, this is what it says in the book, they become very close, don't want to be intimate with anybody for fear of being disappointed. So they very guard their heart very close, and they put up their defences. And they then develop personalities that are impacted by underlying anger. So as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, wow, this is Esau. And that anger really is released not only on the parent sometimes, but actually the sibling, and it can cause sibling rivalry. When you read this, and you're like, actually, this sounds like she's reading from the passage in Genesis. And it says that growing up, they can become easily ignited and inappropriately express this anger that comes from them. And I thought, wow, doesn't that sound like Esau to me? And the favoured child, as they're growing up, because they've been doted on, because they're the favoured one, they end up, and I had to really check myself with this, and I'll explain in a minute, they become great manipulators, and they don't even realise they're doing it. It's not like they're maliciously trying to manipulate, but because they've always got their own way by their adoring parent, they become masters of the art of manipulation. I think it's intriguing, isn't it, the way Jacob himself, you know, he is the one who's trying to get his way all the time because perhaps he had that sense of entitlement. And what it says here, they can develop a false identity, and they're likely to mature without having forged their own personality, their own identity. And therefore, I think of myself in this, growing up. It's not that I was the favourite. It's because I thought I was the favourite. So, like, when my brother used to go and sit on my dad's lap, I would push him off, and I would be sitting on my dad's lap. I am the favourite. So it wasn't that I was the favourite, it's that I was the loud one, yeah, and the one who went for the affection. And my brother was the one who stood back and said, I'll wait and receive the affection. And so I'm very aware that had an impact both on me and my brother. My brother was very quiet, and we used to fight a lot, believe it or not. And unfortunately, my brother was better at martial arts than I was, and he used to sometimes do a side kick in the solar plexus and literally nearly knock me out, you know. But I saw that at work, and I was looking at that in my own adult life, and I thought, well, actually, my life has been that. I have to challenge myself, because actually people then can become objects of manipulation to get your own way, growing up as an adult. And I see Jacob in myself in this passage, because Jacob, he's known as the deceiver, isn't he? He's known as a trickster, as it were, trying to do things to get his own way, because probably he was a favoured child. I might be wrong, but that's what I got from this. As I was looking at this passage, I realised that this is at work, and this is how it could affect them. For one, for Jacob, he tries to manipulate things to get his own way. And for Esau, you see, he's not only the victim of favouritism, but he also feels that rejection at that moment when his father blesses Jacob as well. The only one perhaps who he could trust in also rejected him as well. And that you see that at work, just as this psychologist said, that anger then came out and he didn't know how to control it, and he wanted to kill Jacob. And you see this is at work, this sibling rivalry at work, which causes all these big problems, and then it leads to resentment and bitterness, and Jacob is literally running for his life. But here's a story about it. This is the whole story as we look through this. This is a story about God at work through Jacob, and we see that, don't we? But God is also at work through Esau, because at the end it says that Jacob saw the face of God through Esau. I'm going to run ahead of myself here, but Esau's the one who shows him and runs him and kisses his neck. And you see, wow, God is at work in these two people. And that's the story. The story is an amazing story of reconciliation of two brothers. And that's just amazing. And one thing I wanted to talk about, really, as we read a lot of commentaries on this and a lot of writers, they always identify Jacob as the deceiver. They always do. And that's because his word means, the word means heel catcher, or it means supplanter. But it doesn't necessarily mean deceiver. They get that from us. That's Esau's assessment of him, because when he lost his blessing, Esau was the one who says, "Isn't he rightly called Jacob? For he cheated me twice." So I think what happens is then every commentator, every theologian then reads into that the fact that Jacob is a deceiver. Esau makes this assessment of his brother. Therefore, everything is read through the lens of deception. And I think that doesn't do Jacob justice, because when I read through this passage, I see that Jacob is a man of faith. Do you think? He's not all about deception, isn't he? Okay, he lied this one time. It's pretty obvious that he deceived his father. But it's important to know the reason why he tried to deceive his father, because, remember, Rebekah was given the promise that Jacob would be the one to inherit Abraham's promise, yeah? And they were trying to protect the covenant. So in their mind, they were doing the right thing. Isaac here, he is the one who's following tradition and wants to actually bless the firstborn. But actually, Rebekah and Jacob are, whether right or wrong, actually they are wrong in what they're doing. It's an unjustly action but they're trying to protect God's covenant. You see here, so I'm not saying that's right, but that's what they're doing. So is he truly a deceiver? Well, I looked at the passage further, and it says that Jacob, it says Esau is a skillful hunter, a man of the open field. But it also says, on the contrary, Jacob is a quiet man who dwelled in tents. Now, when I looked at that word quiet or mild, do you know how that is translated everywhere else in the scriptures? It's translated as the word blameless or upright. Nowhere else does that word quiet or mild pop up in your scripture. So I'm wondering if, I might be wrong, I'm wondering if the translators then, because they saw actually Jacob is a bit of a deceiver, therefore we can't call him blameless. And then, isn't it true that God said, further it is in Hebrews, that Jacob I loved and Esau I hated? That's what he says in these passages. So that got me, challenged my thinking. I thought, well, okay, Jacob might be at times deceive people, but is he truly the deceiver that we call him to be? Does he get a real bad rap? And I think he really does. Because as you go through this passage, this is a man who obeyed his parents. Remember, Esau was the one who disobeyed his parents and married people from the Hittites, which really grieved his parents. But Jacob is the one who said, no, I'm going to wait and do as my parents say. I'm going to wait for the woman to come along from the family. And it says that actually they told him to go to Padam Aram, I think it is, the place is called, and get a wife from our own family. And that's what he did. But Esau did the opposite. And we see Jacob is quite an admirable man, isn't it? When he goes and works for Laban. How long does he work for? Well, he thought was Rachel at the time. How long did he work initially? 7 years. And he was deceived by Laban himself. Then he had to work an extra 7 years for the same woman again. So he worked a total of 14 years. So he was working hard, proving himself in this way. And we see that, don't we, as the passage unfolds, that he's a man who quotes God's promises back to him. He's the one who says, this is God's camp. This is the one that says, surely God is in this place. And here we are, as a time where he's faced with Esau. Esau's going to come with 400 men. And he gets to that point where he drops on his knees and he prays to the Lord. I mean, it doesn't sound like this man is a total waste of space, Elizabeth. Thank you for that. Yeah. He's not a complete deceiver. This is a man of faith. So I come to the conclusion that Jacob himself, I don't think we should identify him as deceiver. I come to this conclusion, which I said earlier, that God is committed to a flawed man. God is committed to a flawed man. And I think that was brilliant for me, because I thought, well, actually, Lord, I do mess up. I do make mistakes. Sometimes I do go down a path in which I don't want to do. But I have that promise, and we heard this a couple of weeks ago, that God is committed to me. He's committed to you. He's committed to us as a fellowship. That's good news, isn't it? God is committed here to Jacob because he comes and he reminds him of his promises to him. He then commits to him. He says, look, I want you to go out, go to your father's land as well. And then he's committed to him. He says, look, here, and he sees these heavenly hosts of angels, and he's like constantly saying, look, I'm for you. I'm with you. These are my promises to you. And then Jacob comes to that place, doesn't he, where he's saying, okay, I've had these promises. I've had this reminder of God's love for me, that he's with me. But still, I am so frightened of Esau. Wouldn't you be? I would say that Cole preached on this last week, because I listened to his sermon, because they're going through this passage at the moment. I wonder if you're at odds with somebody and you haven't seen them for so many years, and you get a phone call and saying, actually, yeah, Paul, he's on his way with 400 men. I mean, what would you think? I would be pretty frightened. Why would he be coming with 400 men? It's like he's not coming with his family or a caravan of animals and stuff like that. He's coming with 400 men. You can imagine Jacob, that's why he was so frightened. So he gets to this place where he's on his knees and he's pleading with God. And he puts his family out in front of him. You can see this is his sense of entitlement coming again, his manipulation, saying, actually, I'm going to put all the family out in front of me, because by the time he gets to me, hopefully then he will be diffused of the situation. But you'd think that would be enough, wouldn't you, for Jacob to say, actually, I'm going to trust in God. But it's not. So God comes and wants to teach him a further lesson by coming and wrestling with him. This is an unusual passage, isn't it? God shows up in the evening and starts to wrestle, or the angel of the Lord starts to wrestle with Jacob. And one of the things that I never really emphasise in this passage is that Jacob is wrestling, and he's just wrestling like mad. And he's not letting God overpower him. Now, obviously, God could have overpowered him, obviously, because he's God, because he made the whole universe, you know. But he's wrestling with him, and he won't let him go. And even the angel of the Lord said, let me go, for the day is breaking. You know, because we know from the scripture that if you see God's face, you'll die. So he wrestles with him. He says, look, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. And then what does God do? He dislocates his hip like this. And then he says to him, he said, what's your name? And here's the passage. It's not that Jacob is a deceiver. This is in his mind, his past. Those words must have stuck when his brother says, isn't he rightly named Jacob? Yeah, is he rightly a deceiver? And he's probably thinking, actually, this is who I am. But the Lord is saying, no, I'm going to call you now Israel. And does anyone know what Israel means? For you've wrestled with God and overcome. That's the kind of thing he's saying. So he's saying, actually, no, you're not a product of your past. You've wrestled not only with man, but you've wrestled with God, and you have overcome. And that's a powerful reminder to Jacob, isn't it? You're not that man. You're not that deceiver. You are who I say you are to be. And he gives him a new identity. And that's going to bode him well. Now he is prepared to face his past, because he has come before God and wrestled with God. Now, I just think this passage just screams at me, because obviously you know all that we're going through at the moment. And I've come to that place where I feel very much like I've done all I can to put everything in place. And I've done all I can, and I'm like, actually, no, I don't know what to do, Lord. Which way do I turn? So you only get on your knees and you say, I can trust in you. And sometimes it's a struggle, isn't it? Sometimes you think that wrestling with the Lord, you've dislocated your hip, you're becoming that weak place. You're saying, how can I get through this circumstance? How can I get through this trial? But the Lord's saying, actually, I've got you right where I want you. Isn't it Paul said, in your weakness, that God is strong? So I found very much encouraged by this passage, that I felt very much like Jacob, absolutely nowhere else to turn but to God. And over this holiday, I found myself wrestling not only with God, but wrestling with myself over these issues. And I feel a lot more at peace now, because actually that wonderful, one of my subtitles, that God is committed to a flawed man. God's committed to me. Not that he owes me anything, but he died for me, and he's committed to me. And even though I might be weak at times and vulnerable at times and struggle at times and be in despair and fear at times, God is saying, no, I'm for you and I'm going to work this out for you. And I would say that to us as a fellowship. The struggle that we're going through, there is a tendency to say, oh no, fear and despair and worry and anxiety. But God is saying, I'm committed to you as a fellowship. Might not be the way you think it will be or work out, but nonetheless, I am committed to you, even though you're flawed people. I think that's a real encouragement, isn't it? So here we have this two journeys of these two men. One, Esau, who exits the picture for a while. And Jacob, we see God working these things out, reminding him of his presence, reminding him of his promises, and wrestling with him to grapple with those issues that he had. Finally, he comes to that place where he learns to be dependent upon God. He can finally face his past. And interestingly, now he comes to that place where he just goes up to Esau. Doesn't say, it's the role reversal now. He leaves his family behind and goes and bows down 7 times to Esau. And what would you expect to happen? This is the such a tense passage, isn't it? Esau throws his arms around his brother and kisses his neck. That's an amazing story. And it says that Jacob saw the face of God in Esau. And it's true, isn't it, that we sometimes see the face of God in the most unexpected of people, of places. And you see this wonderful reconciliation take place because of this journey that they've had. I come to the conclusion that I couldn't think of any other reason what Esau learned apart from the time that he had away that diffused the whole situation. And by the time he saw Jacob, he just wrapped his arms around him. It's an amazing passage, isn't it? It is absolutely amazing. God is committed to a flawed man, and he sees the face of God through his brother Esau, and that brings about wonderful reconciliation. Can anybody be reminded of a passage in the New Testament that reminds you of, where Esau comes running and throws his arms around and kisses? The prodigal son. And I think that screams in this passage, because he saw in him the face of God. And isn't that Father God? Even though we are flawed people, even though sometimes we run away from God and we mess up, God the Father is always there, welcoming us with loving arms. I wrote this song called "He Runs to Me with Kisses." That's pretty bold statement to make, but that's what Father is like. He doesn't like it when we go down a path in which is not helpful, but actually he is the one who's always there running to us with welcome arms. So I think at that end of that passage, I would say if there's anybody who feels they're backslidden here, at times I feel like that, especially over these last couple of weeks. Just remember God is there. Remember that picture of Esau and his brother. Remember that's God with you, wanting to wrap his arms around you and running to you and embracing you with kisses. That's my reflection on it. I'm just going to go over again. I would just say you're not a product of your past. God has given you a new identity, and he's committed to you as his children. And sometimes he needs to wrestle some issues out with us, like he did with Jacob. We've all got issues. I think I was talking with someone else. I think Jenny, wasn't it? We've all got issues. Even Fred was saying that this morning, weren't you? We always meet people with issues, don't we? And we all have. But actually, God is the one who wrestles these things out with us. And sometimes it's not easy. But the reason he does that is so that we can learn to be dependent upon him. God's committed to you, Fred.
Yes.
Go on.
Excuse me. A main thing on the same theme is that I, when I was younger, was a bit of a called pester.
A bit of a what?
Pester.
What's that?
Well, it's
Pest.
when you're a child, you pester your parents.
Okay.
And the other thing was that my sister is naturally very intelligent.
Yes.
And I am not naturally very intelligent. So I thought that I was the one that was, as they say at the time, there's people that are good with their brain and there's people that are good with their hands.
Yeah.
And I thought I was one of these ones that was good with my hands.
Right, okay.
And all through my life, I've had when I was younger, I had a strange feeling that there was somebody else looking after me.
Yeah.
And that, I've now realised that is Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Because there's so many things that are still happening today that you can remember yourself with that.
Amen.
And relating to exactly what you said and what you said, it's all coming true. That there is a situation where there's people everywhere that are in the same situation.
Anyway.
And you think you're the only one that's got this problem.
I know. Thank you, Fred. Appreciate that. We're going to come in. I'm going to close there because that's wrapped it off very nicely, Fred. Really just want you to say God is committed to us as a fellowship. God is committed to you individually. Now, obviously, we want to be committed to him and honour him with our lives. That's true. But he is committed to you as his children, and he'll get us through all that we struggle with. I wonder if we come to a time of prayer. I don't know if you wanted to... Jenny's going to lead us now in that time. So.